Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 13th of July 1924, the festival of unpopular sports mixed with rabid jingoism, otherwise known as the Olympics, is officially opened. Which brings us to a correction. Last week I suggested that the Times didn't think much of Britain's chances in the athletics events. Wrong. The Times thought the public didn't think much of Britain's chances in the athletics events. The Times itself thought they were pretty good. And now for some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. The Democrat convention being held in New York went about as well as it did last week. Monday brought us the 77th ballot, Tuesday the 83rd ballot, and Wednesday the 93rd ballot. During the 103rd ballot they gave up, and John W. Davis, former ambassador to Great Britain, was acclaimed the candidate. Of course, nowadays the democratic selection process is so much better. A succession of open primaries forces candidates to debate in public, meaning that any that are not up to the rigours of the task are quickly weeded out. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, spoiler alert, will make a name for himself, was the campaign manager for Al Smith, governor of New York State. On Monday, the Times published a picture of him. You might think there's nothing unusual about that, but he's standing. In 1921, he contracted what I always understood was polio, although Wikipedia thinks it might be something else. He spent most of the rest of his life in a wheelchair, which is why photographs of him as president invariably show him sitting down. But here he is on his feet. Must have killed him. I think it's perhaps worthwhile thinking about or talking about what took them. The leading candidate was a McAdoo, who was Protestant, a prohibitionist, and had a great deal of support from the Ku Klux Klan. Smith, his opponent, was Roman Catholic and an anti-prohibitionist. And that's the problem. The supporters of one would not, under any circumstances, support the other. So they ended up with Davis. There is sad news on the other side of the American political fence. President Coolidge's son has died of blood poisoning. The Prince Regent of Abyssinia, Ras Tafari, known to history as Haile Selassie, is in London on an official visit. Last week I mentioned the ongoing correspondence on the subject of road servicing. What's better, tarmac or concrete? Well, this week in a letter to the Times, another candidate has emerged: brick. The Ford Motor Company are thinking of opening a car factory in Dagenham, Essex. This won't be the first car factory in southern England. Lagonda and Vauxhall are already well established. But it is still something of a rarity. The first car will roll off the production line in 1931. The factory is still there, but nowadays only makes engines. I say only, but that's still pretty important. More motoring news came a couple of pages later. Another innovation was introduced in New York yesterday for dealing with the traffic congestion, which is becoming an increasingly serious problem. The method consists of a system of coloured lights extending over Broadway from Rexter Street in the financial district for 6 miles to 86th Street at intervals of 6 blocks. Directed by these signals, north and southbound traffic moves uninterruptedly for 90 seconds, then after an interval of 10 seconds, east and west traffic proceeds for 40 seconds. The system is supplemented by policemen, but last night it worked so efficiently that they had little to do. Is this the first traffic light? Not quite, but it is among the first set of traffic lights with automatic control. On the opening day of the Somme in July 1916, the Newfoundland Regiment went over the top at Beaumont Hamel and was cut to pieces, suffering one of the worst casualty rates in the war. The commander of the British effort that day was, of course, Douglas Haig, so you would think that the locals might have a thing or two to say to him on his trip to Newfoundland, but apparently not. They would have been perfectly within their rights to do so. Haig's plan was far too ambitious, but in 1924, Haig is the greatest living Briton, the man who won the war. So he is hailed wherever he goes. It won't be until the 1930s and in his grave that he will be made the scapegoat. Fun fact, Newfoundland was not part of Canada at the time. In Italy, a new decree has been issued covering the press. Should a newspaper publish 2 pieces containing false or tendentious news, the government has the right to suppress it. They're probably just trying to stop misinformation. What could possibly go wrong? I saw this in Wednesday's edition. Hitler, who is still confined to the fortress of Landsberg, has resigned the leadership of the German Nationalist Socialist (Fascist) Party. It is said that he is writing a book. A romantic fiction, perhaps? Well, fiction anyway. An article on the trade in opium in China suggests that it is flourishing like never before. The whole purpose of the ban enacted in the Treaty of Versailles was to help the Chinese suppress the trade. It has been announced that Oliver Baldwin, son of the former Conservative Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, is following in his father's footsteps and standing for Parliament, for the Labour Party. That agglomeration of the unholy, wicked, meddling, vindictive and intolerant, otherwise known as metricators, have turned their sights on Britain's currency. In 1924, money was simple. There were 12 pence in a shilling and 20 shillings in a pound. Easy. But the metricators want to make it 10 pence in a shilling. Why not 17 or 53? In 1971, they will more or less get their way with decimalisation. In the decade that followed, Britain would see power cuts, strikes, runaway inflation, civil unrest, and the worst drought in 100 years. In the Olympics, Britain won gold at the 100 metres, 400 metres, and 800 metres. Paavo Nurmi of Finland participated in the 5,000 metres 2 hours after he won the 1,500 metres. He won that one too. More on the Olympics later. The participants in the Empire Exhibition Rodeo that attracted so much ire from the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals have been acquitted. Britain has experienced a heat wave with temperatures of 83 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade being recorded. Wednesday brought uncertain news for communist caricaturists. Did I say that? Communist caricaturists. There was a time during the late war when some believed that the boxes to which top hats had been returned would prove their coffins. Well, a lot of things did change during the war, like the end of the waxed moustache and men starting to wear wrist watches. Many an old clerk in a city office has felt that the sky was falling and the firm going to the dogs when his young master began coming to business in felt. It has taken him a little time to discover that far from being a token of disrespect for commercial tradition, this change was an act of observance. You sure about that? To the founder of the firm, a top hat was a symbol of solid respectability. To his successor, who has for that admirable reason ceased to wear it to the office, it is primarily a frivolous or ceremonial headgear. Work in felt and play in silk is the modern motto. Silk hat being another name for top hat. But of course, that is the role the top hat nowadays plays. I've mentioned the housing crisis before. Tuesday brought an example of just how bad things have become. Aged women and children were among the 40 residents of Jerden Place, Walham Green, who were evicted from the tenements there yesterday, under an order obtained by the Fulham Borough Council. This particular block contains some of the oldest houses in London, and they had been condemned by the local authority as unfit for human habitation. One dreads to think what that might have meant. Just note the framing here. Aged women and children were among. In my mind's eye, that is what I see, aged women and children. But the word among implies that there were working-age men here. But I don't see that in my mind's eye. Of course, no journalist would attempt that sort of sleight of hand today. There were some distressing scenes when the evictions took place. The news of the eviction and the presence of a body of police on the scene caused considerable excitement in the neighbourhood, a crowd numbering several hundred people gathering outside the premises. The tenants had piled their furniture and other belongings on the ground fronting the road, and sat disconsolately in a group, wondering what to do. At present no other accommodation had been found, and the tenants state that they are determined not to submit to the alternative of being housed at the workhouse. One tends to think of the workhouse as a Victorian institution, Oliver Twist and all that, but it's still there, and people are pretty desperate to avoid it. Why? Pride, perhaps? Because they value their liberty? With a view to providing accommodation, the chairman of the Public Health Committee of the borough had previously made an inspection of a large garage in Farm Lane, which he said could have been partitioned off and give 3 rooms to each tenant. The building contained up-to-date lavatory and washing conveniences, but the place was up for sale. Other garage accommodation had been found, but the rent was prohibitive. A member of the council declared, "The council have done nothing in the matter as far as building houses is concerned. The policy of the council is wait and see and do nothing, and evict people and not take responsibility." Note that he talks about the council building houses. Clearly this is something that councils were expected to do by now. Questions were asked in the House of Commons. In replying, Mr. Wheatley, the Minister of Health, and therefore, obviously, the relevant minister, had this to say: "I am informed that the houses are in a most deplorable state from a sanitary point of view, and quite beyond repair. They have also been condemned as dangerous structures on the report of the district surveyor." Ah, dangerous. That puts a rather different spin on things. I also find the phrase "quite beyond repair" comment-worthy. Nowadays, no building is beyond repair, which is odd because I can't think of any invention or process that has been introduced in the intervening century that would make the unrepairable repairable. I think this is more a statement about economics. At the time it just made more sense to tear a building down and start again. But then, if the council couldn't stop you, as it can today, that may have been the sensible thing to do. On more than one occasion, but mostly in the 30th of March episode, I have pointed out that trams are in trouble. A Mr. E. H. Bailey, in a letter to the Times, adds fuel to that particular fire. "The startling fact has been published that the working of the tramways for the last year shows a loss of £316,000 £276, and that during the past 12 years £1 million has been lost." I'm not sure that £1 million figure is either here nor there. There was a war in that period after all, but the annual loss is staggering. It's about 60,000 ounces of gold, or about £60 million in today's money, after you have applied the Crozier fudge factor to account for the overvaluation of the pound. Well, I say staggering, but I seem to remember reading about much larger losses on London's buses in more recent times. He goes on. "This heavy tax on the community is caused by the unwillingness of the London County Council," trams in central London are state-owned, "to scrap the tramways and cut the loss of the cost of their installation, although they do not and can never be made to pay. Omnibuses can carry all the traffic and save the ratepayers the enormous cost of maintaining the permanent way. Besides the loss in money, tramways have the following objections: the jangling noise produced by the action of metal upon metal, accidents because a tram car stops in the middle of the road, whereas an omnibus stops at the side of the footway, congestion because when a tram car breaks down, a string of cars and other vehicles behind it are held up, injury caused by the rails to the wheels of other vehicles." I should point out that things are hardly any better with the privately owned trams. At risk of repeating myself, it seems odd to us that trams were abolished, but when you read the thoughts of people from the time, it is not so hard to see why. As mentioned earlier, Britain has done rather well on the track at the Paris Olympics. Harold Abrahams won the 100 metres, Eric Liddell the 400 metres, and Douglas Lowe the 800 metres. At no point does the Times feel the need to mention that Abrahams is Jewish. It also doesn't mention that Liddell refused to compete in the 100 metres because the final was run on a Sunday, so he ran in the 400 metres instead. Still, the Times has issues. Efforts are to be made to amend the whole schedule of the Games, chiefly in the direction of curtailment. The present schedule, with its system of marking, was explained in an article in the Times on July the 9th. Was it? I've had a good hard look for it without success. It would appear that there is some sort of officially sanctioned table in which gold medals are worth so many points and silver medals so many points less, etc. It would appear to be a more scientific take on the modern-day medal table. The point is that we can determine who won the Olympics. And it will be remembered that the contests are divided into no fewer than 22 groups or classes. That the system is unwieldy and full of anomalies there can be no doubt. To take a simple example, from the British point of view and point of view of all the chief athletic nations, Abrahams's achievement in the 100 yards was a great performance which will be talked about wherever athletes foregather for many years to come. A bit better than that, what with the Oscar-winning movie. But it was only one of 26 items in the group of track and field events. As there are 22 groups, his victory was only 1/26th of 1/22nd of the whole Olympic total, or less than 1/570th of the whole. On the basis of actual marks counted, reckoning all the places in all the events, Abrahams earned considerably less than 2,000th of the total Olympic marks. On the other hand, weightlifting is a whole group in itself, and therefore counts 22 times as much as the 100 yards. Does anyone believe that weightlifting is 22 times as important as being the fastest runner in the world? Or that the winning of the 100 yards deserves less than 1/2000th of the Olympic glory? True, but how many of the 1924 weightlifters got a movie made about their exploits? It is probably impossible to devise any plan satisfactory to everybody, but there is a strong current setting in of reducing the total number of groups. Wouldn't bet the farm on that one. In the next Olympics, they are going to have events just for women. Actually, in this Olympics, they had events just for women in the tennis, one sport that will get culled for a while, and fencing. Weightlifting may go altogether. So may yachting. Wishful thinking. Shooting and wrestling, as at present organised, are avowedly unsatisfactory. More wishful thinking. Ought there again to be 2 groups, one for polo and one for equestrian sports? And finally, there are 4 groups of painting, sculpture, literature and music. How about them? What? Mind you, is a gold medal for sculpture any more absurd than a gold medal for beach volleyball? But he makes an important point. If this bloat continues, the only people who will be wanting to host the Games will be corrupt local politicians willing to bleed their taxpayers white. In addition to reducing the number of groups, there is undoubtedly need of compression inside the groups themselves. In rowing, for instance, racing 2 pairs or 4s with coxswain ought not to rank with the 8s or single sculls. They are not first-class events, according to the standards of modern sport. Neither in 1924 nor 2024. Mind you, I very much doubt the writer's successors were making the same points when Steve Redgrave was racking up the gold medals in precisely those events. That compression, limitations and curtailment in all manner of directions will be the rule in future Olympiads seems assured. Another one not to bet the farm on. The 2024 Paris Olympics will have 32 sports, including breaking, whatever that is, surfing and rugby sevens. Anyway, that's all for this week. I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.